Díomh Ganesha, agus tá fáilte romh chuig feachtas na litríochta idirnáisiúnta. Good evening, Ambassador of Romania, His Excellency Laurențiu Stefan, Dublin City Librarian Mircea, Romanians living in Ireland and readers. My name is Anne-Marie Kelly, I'm Director of Dublin UNESCO City of Literature. And on behalf of Dublin City Council, I would like to welcome you to the Dublin Literary Award Winners in Conversation event here in Merrion Square as part of this year's International Literature Festival Dublin. You probably have heard on the grapevine that Romanian writer Mircea Cărtărescu and text and translator Sean Cotter has scooped this year's Dublin Literary Award for Solenoid, published by Deep Vellum of Dallas, Texas. Solenoid, in the words of the judges, was the book that kept coming to the top of the pile as they deliberated on their choice from the long list to the short list, and ultimately the final one. Based on Cărtărescu's own role as a high school teacher, Solenoid begins with the mundane details of a diarist's life, and it quickly spirals into a philosophical account of life, history, philosophy, and mathematics. By turns wildly inventive, philosophical and lyrical, with passages of great beauty, Solenoid is the work of a major European writer who is still relatively little known to English language readers. Sean Cotter's translation of the novel sets out to change that situation, capturing the lyrical precision of the original, thereby opening up Cărtărescu's work to an entirely new readership. The prize awarded by Dublin City Council annually for 29 years was presented yesterday to the winners and is the most valuable prize in the world for a single work of fiction in English or translated into English. Mircea Cărtărescu is a writer, professor and a journalist who has published more than 25 books. His work has received the Formentor Prize in 2018, the Thomas Mann Prize in 2018, the Austrian State Prize for Literature in 2015, and the Villanica Prize in 2011, among many others. His work has been translated into 23 languages. Sean Cotter is a translator and a professor of literature and translation at the University of Texas at Dallas. A previous National Endowment for the Arts Translation Fellow, Cotter is the translator of 11 books, including Theo Bob's Curl and Nikita Stanescu's Wheel with a Single Spoke and Other Poems, which was awarded the Best Translated Book Award for Poetry. His translation of Magda Carnecci's Femme, a finalist for the Penn Translation Award, was published by Deep Vellum in 2021. Alex Clarke will be the interviewer for this evening's event and is a journalist and broadcaster who regularly hosts live events. She writes for The Guardian and The Observer and co-hosts the Times Literary Supplement's weekly podcast and the Graham Norton Book Club on Audible. Now, audience members were due to get a signed copy of the book this evening after the event, but unfortunately, due to distribution problems, the books have not arrived, and I'm really sorry about that. But we are going to organise to get the book to you by dispatch or collection from your local library, so please leave your details with us, give us your email addresses at the end of the session. Solenoid is also available from your local library and as an e-book and e-audiobook. So now, can I ask you to put your hands together and welcome this year's Dublin Literary Award winners to the stage.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much to Anne-Marie for introducing us and for her considerable part in organising this wonderful prize and bringing it to you today. Now, in my experience, when you arrive to do an event like this and you're told that there's been a change of venue, it's generally bad news, because it means not that many people are coming and we're all going to squish into a tiny room. But no, you have been changed because there's so many of you, which to me is a reflection of this wonderful prize and its history, appetite for reading fiction, new fiction. As sometimes, it may be to some of you unfamiliar fiction, it won't be by the end of the hour. I'm so delighted that you're here, Mircea, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm also very proud of having won this prize and really very happy. It's the greatest achievement of my life so far.
That's a wonderful thing to hear. I wonder if... Now, look, as Anne-Marie was just saying in her introduction, you are a very prolific writer. But this book, as soon as I started reading it and spent many days in its company, I realised it reads very much like the work of a lifetime. Is it? Did you start thinking about this book a long time ago?
Before answering your very nice question, I would make a sort of a small synopsis of everything that I wrote, starting from my youth till this very day, because I think it's important. My very modest work has a sort of a dialectic of its own. So I started as writing journal, and I think till this very day, my journal is one of the most important things that I ever wrote, because I write in my journal mostly how can I say, almost each and every day. So I started my journal when I was 17. So last year it turned 50. And I publish it each 7 years. Each 7 years I publish a big part of it, about 500 or 600 pages. So I have 4 till now, and next year I will be published the 5th. Versions of this very important book of mine, in a way, if you can call it a book, are also published in Swedish and in Catalan. And then, when I was a young student, I started to write poems. And I belong to a famous generation in my country, the generation in blue jeans, because it was called like that because we were the first in our country who shifted from a formal way of dressing with a tie and so on, into a very informal and very kinky, I would say, for that time, way of dressing and way of thinking. Actually, we were long hair. We were beatniks. Actually, we were very much influenced with the Beat generation, with Allen Ginsberg, with Ferlinghetti, Gregory Corso, Gary Snyder, and so on. With Burroughs, with Kerouac, and all of them. But at a certain point, this kind of poetry started to seem to me a bit too easy. I think I'm a profound person. And I thought by that time that at a certain moment, poetry wasn't enough for me to express myself in my full shape, I would say. And I shifted to prose, and I think it was the smartest move in my life, because I got in love with prose. Because prose was and is the field where I feel the most comfortable until now. And I started to write short stories at the beginning, like many other writers. You don't dare to throw yourself into the ocean first. First, you throw yourself into a pool. It's safer like that. So I started to write short stories, and my first book of short stories was called Nostalgia, and was made out of 5 texts, some of them short stories, some of them long short stories. And it was successful. It was a book that I published during the dictatorship, and unfortunately it has been very much censored by that time. About 1/3 of the text was thrown out from the book, and I suffered very much by that time. But I wanted that my book be published because the people wanted literature by that time. They needed one. They needed literature like breathing air, like breathing fresh air, because everybody was living in a prison by that time. And then I published a series of 4 novels, and I'm so happy that I could do it. I'm not proud of them. How I can say, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for them because they were given to me, because I did nothing to do them. I was only a portal for them. I only received them.
I have to. I don't believe that. I can understand you felt animated by something. There was something you really wanted to say.
Yeah.
But you had to make them. You had to make them successful. You had to, in some way, refine what was given to you, as you say.
It is absolutely true. But you know how it is, if you allow me to make a little parable. We are at the races, horse races. And there is a jockey on the back of a horse. But a jockey has to be small, has to be light, because not the jockey wins the races, but the horse. So in my opinion, the solution is that the jockey touch the horse as little as possible. If it was possible, the jockey should levitate over the horse without touching it in any point. So you should let your horse go free. You should let it free, because in this way he will win the race. And the parable is easily to understand. The writer is the little jockey. You have to be light. You don't have to disturb your horse. Your horse is your mind, and our mind, as you all know, is smarter than us. Is more vaster than us, and so on. So I always let my mind go free, and this is how I wrote the 4 novels that I told you. First was Travesty. It's a psychoanalytical novel, and archetypal one, following the works of Jung, Freud, Adler, and so on. It's about the development of a human being which was born a hermaphrodite, and then he became a boy. His parents chose that he will be raised as a boy, but actually the girl survived in him. So I tried to free the voice of the inner sister that we all have if we are men, like all women have an inner brother inside, an inner boy inside. And it's very important for us to let the other one in our soul have a voice, go free. This is why I love to write with a woman's voice. I love to create women as characters. And then I got a bit of courage, and I wrote my biggest and most ambitious book, which is Blinding. Blinding is, I would say, the plane carrier of my fleet. It's the biggest ship in my fleet, and all the others are around it. And it's a huge book, 1,500 pages long. It consists in three novels, actually. It's a trilogy. Mm-hmm. And I think I will never do what I did there. Only one volume is available in English. Only the first volume has been translated. And then I wrote Solenoid, the book that we are talking about, and I think Solenoid is, in a way, the wisest book I wrote. It crystallizes my whole experience in life, everything that I ever thought, that I ever smelled, like I ever touched, I ever saw or I ever heard. Everything that I felt, as Nabokov said, with my spine. Nabokov said, you do not understand a piece of art with your heart or with your brain, but with your spine. If you don't feel a thrill on your spine when you read a poem, the poem is not good. So I tried to synthesize all I know about this universe where I was born without knowing why, in only one book, which is almost 1,000 pages long.
I'm going to bring Sean in a minute, but just briefly before I do, that idea of synthesizing your life's experience into fiction,
Yeah.
I'm wondering how it relates to the diaries that you also publish. What separates them as works of art? What relationship are they into one another?
It's a wonderful question. I thought a lot about it because, my diaries are like the stem of my tree. And from this stem, all the branches come out and have fruits. I think that this process of distilling, distilling the liquors of my work starts with the stem and then spreads in the branches. It's in a way the way Kafka wrote his work, because Kafka, didn't start to write books. He wasn't interested in writing novels or short stories. He wrote everything in his diary. So all his life he wrote a single book, actually, only one book, where he wrote his diaries and also wrote his stories, his versions of stories, his versions of novels, and so on. Even his biggest novels, like The Trial and The Castle, were written in the same notebooks, like the journal. So I tried to do the same. I tried to write my whole life, only one book, only one text, a huge text, which, in a principle, as a principle, demands a reader who can read this book all his life or all her life. So it's an ideal reader for a lifetime work. Of course, it's only an ideal situation. No reader will ever give up his life or her life to read a book, only one book.
Well, but actually, you're right, of course. But sometimes there are books that are so profound and have so many facets that they are books to which we can return over and over again. Mm-hmm. And they are very frequently books that are trying to convey something about the totality of human experience, as well as being specific. And we'll come on to the specifics of your book, I know, shortly. But well, we've had a lot of metaphors, Sean, already. We've had a jockey. Mm-hmm. We seem to have a fleet at one point. Mm-hmm. We've had the great tree. I'm wondering, for you as a translator coming to this work, whether you needed a kind of organising metaphor to sort of approach it, and whether you think, as a translator, you have to have a light hand as well.
Yeah, this is, it's great just to hear Mircea talk, by the way. I could just hear and listen for a long time. Translation is often talked about with thousands of metaphors, right? Mm. Sometimes I feel like my work is to wrest translation away from the metaphors and to bring us back into the practice of it, because since I'm doing something, or translators are doing something that you can't see, right? Especially if it's done well, you can't see what I've done, how I've had to, what compromises I was facing, and where I've put the accent and where I've played things a little more slowly. All these things in translation are invisible unless you sit there and read it with the original. And I do know one person, Mircea Cărtărescu, says that he listened to the audio book of the English version and held the Romanian version in his lap and read it through.
Wow.
And that just, that's a man who needs a hobby. But he said that it sounded good. Yeah. So no, I don't have a metaphor, but what I am doing while I'm translating is I'm listening to the words, and I'm trying to figure out just what in the world is going on in the text, because I'm from team translate first rather than team read first, and there's two big groups of translators that way.
You mean you go in and start translating?
I've read about 200 pages,
right?
Which is just the beginning, right? That's just the overture
exactly.
of a book like this. And so I'd read that much to get an idea of what it is, and to to be able to fake my way through some grant proposals and that type of thing. And then you go back, and then as I'm reading it, I keep kind of this, this can't be the word for ghoul here. Is this really a ghoul that's coming up? Yes, it's a ghoul. All right, so now we got to type ghoul. And then I go through the rest of the book that way, right, kind of surfing on it, I get to use a metaphor. And then go back and revise. I think I did 5 versions of the book in total, right? But as I'm doing all of that, I'm really listening to the work, trying to figure out what it wants to do. In that sense, I have a light hand, right? That's really the priority.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining Mircea's voice for some of the narrator parts. I'm imagining other Romanians that I know. I'm imagining sometimes actors that I know, Romanian actors that I know, sometimes American actors that I know. How would they say these things? Because it's impossible to translate a word, right? It's impossible to translate just the text, a sentence on the page, or it's impossible to translate a paragraph on the page as it is. You've got to, feel it. You've got to, what would someone do with their hands while they're saying these words? Those are all the things that I'm trying to imagine to get me through the translation.
So you have to live in the world that the book is creating.
Way too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I think you're going to read a little bit for us now.
Yeah.
I'd love you to, to give everybody a flavour who hasn't yet read it. I did say to Mircea, would you like to read from your book? And he said, well, my English is not as it should, so maybe should be, so maybe Sean could read. And his English is magnificent.
Yes.
Very much better than my Romanian, but also apparently just set to the kind of metaphor dial. We're having a lot of symbols and metaphors and parables, so that survives into your English, for sure.
Well, I think we shouldn't scare the public too much. My book is not so metaphorical, metaphysical, and so on. Sometimes it's also very funny, at least in my opinion.
It is very funny. It is very funny.
My main character is a very modest school teacher. And a big part of the novel takes part in that school.
Yeah.
And it was for me, an occasion to make a sort of a gallery of crazy teachers, crazy professors. In many schools there are very special characters teaching geography, foreign languages, and so on. Some of them being absolutely wonderful teachers, but others being a kind of maniacs. And I was very happy to describe them, like in Amarcord, if you saw Fellini's movie, where he also describes some of his professors in his youth when he was a child. So in many parts of the novel, I was very happy to write comic scenes, comical characters, nice and easy pages, alternating with parabolical, metaphysical, theological even pages.
And also some fairly surreal aspects, which we will come to. But I'm going to let Sean give us a...
Read it out.
Give us a... Yeah, go for it.
So this is a passage when the narrator is speaking, and it's a kind of an anti-novel. The narrator is writing a record of his anomalies, rather than giving us a story from beginning to end. But there are these passages where he kind of soliloquizes a little bit in an interior way, and this is one of those. At the last judgment, one will come and say, Lord, I wrote War and Peace. Another will say, Lord, I wrote The Magic Mountain, where the world depends on the sacrifice of a child. Another will say, Lord, I wrote over 80 novels and story collections. Another will say, Lord, I received a large international prize. Another will say, Lord, I wrote Finnegan's Wake, and only for you, Lord, since no one else can read it. No offense, everybody.
One for the home audience there.
Another, Lord, look at 100 Years of Solitude. A better book was never written. They will come in droves, each holding his heaps of books with sales figures and quotes from critics and press clippings, like the church founders depicted in the Naus with miniature edifices in their hands. They will be outlined in rainbows and energy. All their faces will shine like the sun, and the Lord will say to them, yes, of course, I read all of them, even before they were written. You gave people hours of enjoyment. You led them to meditation and reverie. You painted the most amazing trompe-l'oeil, in the most baroque, the most ornamented, the most massive portals on the smooth yellow bone of the interior of the forehead. But which of these portals ever actually opened? Which of these allowed the eyelid of the forehead to lift from the brain's eye? Which of these allowed the brain to actually see? Over to one side, humble in their rags, will be Kafka and Judge Schreber, Isidore Ducasse and Swift and Sabato and Darger and Risori, along with 1,000 other anonymous writers, the authors of torn, burnt, frozen diaries buried in the rush of time. They will have empty hands, but letters scribbled across their palms, the master of dreams, the great Isakar. And after them will come billions of writers who only wrote with tears, with blood, with substance P, with urine and adrenaline and dopamine and ephedrine, directly onto their organs with ulcers of fear, on their skin excoriated with ecstasy. Each of them will carry their own skin covered in writing, from which the Lord, gathering them together between the cover of birth and the cover of death, will create a great book of human suffering. I would like this text to be that kind of page, one of the billions of human skins covered by infected, suppurating letters, bound in the book of horror of living. Anonymous like all the others, because my anomalies, however unusual they are, do not overshadow the tragic anomaly of the spirit dressed in flesh. And the one thing I want you to read on my skin, you who will never read it, is a single cry repeated page after page. Leave, run away, remember you are not from here. But I am not writing for someone to read me. I'm writing to try to understand what is happening to me, what labyrinth I am in, whose test I am subject to, how I can answer to get out whole. Writing about my past and my anomalies and my translucid life, which reveals a motionless architecture, I try to make out the rules of this game, to distinguish the signs, to put them together, and to figure out where they are pointing so I can go in that direction. No book has any meaning if it is not a gospel. A prisoner on death row could have his cell lined with bookshelves, all wonderful books, but what he really needs is an escape plan. You can't escape if you don't believe you can escape from a cell with infinitely thick walls, without doors and without windows. The convict in the cartoon can escape by moving perpendicular to the page of the book, toward me, who is reading it in another dimension. I've read thousands of books, but never one that was a landscape as opposed to a map. Every page of theirs is flat, but life itself is not. Why would I, a three-dimensional creature, take as a guide the 2 dimensions of an ordinary text? Where will I find the cubical page whose reality is modeled? Where is the hypercubic book whose covers gather the hundreds of cubes of its pages? Only then, through the tunnel of cubes, can we escape from the suffocating cell, or at least breathe the air of another world. If I could breathe the clouds and streets and trams, the trees and women, like the pure air of a much denser world. Today, of course, is Sunday. I'm not teaching. Last night, I read Kafka until 1 a.m, stopping at the fragment with Isakar and Hermana. I couldn't go any further. I don't think a truer thing has ever been written in the world. Master of dreams, master of twilight, Isakar losing himself in the mirror, Hermana melting into Isakar's chest like it was another mirror, infesting his flesh and blood with melancholy. I placed the book face down on the bed and walked to the mirror. I stared at the mirror the rest of the night. From the start, I realized I should be naked, like Isakar, like Hermana. I quickly removed my clothes and was shocked to see that in the mirror, I was a woman. I had golden hair that lit up the entire bedroom. I had slightly saggy, pear-shaped breasts. In the room, I was Isakar. In the mirror, I was Hermana, my sister hidden by the all-too-powerful light of reality. That's why, I said to myself, looking into the eyes of the woman with my features wrapped in the spiderweb of her hair. That's why the master of dreams sunk his head so deeply into the mirror. There he could see Hermana, who had melted into his chest. Because Hermana is always on the other side of the mirror. She is, in fact, the other side, the parallel world in which Isakar is a woman. As I pressed my hands to hers, my chest to her breasts, my lips to her lips, and then she melted into my chest, where I feel her even now, like an overwhelming emotion.
Sean, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we can see it is funny. It is funny. There is a great deal of humour. And it is the combination of the humour with this existential apprehension, I guess. I wanted to ask you about, I guess, a key kind of scene in the book that happens relatively early on. And it's when the narrator recalls the moment at which, in a sense, his life, or one part of his life, stops. It's a point at which he reads to his poetry group his extremely long epic poem. And I was very interested to hear you mention Nabokov a bit, because there was something so kind of playfully Nabokov-like about that moment, because he has this belief that this is going to be the rest of his life now. It doesn't go very well. He never writes again. And it's like, you were saying it's an anti-novel, and it's like a sort of another path, isn't it? Can you tell us just about that aspect of the book?
You put the finger on a really very important point in my book, maybe the crossroad of it, because until that scene, I thought I was writing another novel. I thought I was writing a sort of a long essay about the anomalies of my mind, which are very many, and I don't want to bore you with them. I'm kind of a, I don't know, not very sane person. But yes, it was a biographical moment, because it just happened when I was very young. I was 21, and I was reading for the first time in a literary circle. All I had written till then was this very long poem called The Fall, which was a sort of a, how I can describe it, a sort of a T.S. Eliot poem, a sort of a wasteland, very long and very ambitious. And when I read it in front of the most important literary critic that we had by that time, who sadly died 1 month ago, and who was a sort of a god of the Romanian literature, he was absolutely shocked and surprised, and he praised a lot my poem. And he said, well, you have a great future ahead of you. It was a sort of a prophecy. In a way, he created me in that moment. I owe him a lot. His name is Nicolae Manolescu. But in the novel, in Solenoid, I asked myself what it would have happened if he would destroy my poem. If he would say, take this garbage out of here. And I realized several things. First is that for sure I would have been discouraged and never write literature again. And from this point, the book changes into a sort of anti-novel, as Sean said, a sort of a dystopy in a way. So how would my life have changed if I wouldn't have given up my literary career? And the second thing I realized is a paradox, that I would have been a much better writer. I would have been a much better writer if I wouldn't write for glory, for prizes, for reviews, if I wouldn't have played the game. Sometimes I'm very ashamed that I'm a simple writer like everyone that wants glory, that wants recognition and so on. Because my ideal is that kind of a writer like Kafka was, who didn't care about them, about all these homages and so on, who wrote only for himself, who wrote only for fulfilling his destiny. And my character became this kind of a writer. He didn't write to be read anymore. He wrote like a sort of a divine duty. He wrote about his body. He wrote about his mind. He wrote about divinity. He wrote about everything he really felt, without asking himself, will this please to the public? Would I be recognized because I write in this way? And I think that is the true way of writing. And I made a list from what Sean read. I made a list of this kind of writer I wanted to be. The first is Kafka, then is the so-called President Schreber, about whom Freud wrote a very important study. Schreber was a madman who wrote a description of his madness, one of the strangest books ever written. Or there is a sort of a painter-writer who is called Henry Darger. Henry Darger, I don't know if you heard of him. He's the writer who wrote the biggest books in the world. One of his novels is 25,000 pages. Another one is 15,000 pages. And another one is 5,000 pages. He was a janitor in a hospital in Chicago, and he lived till he was 80. And one day he didn't show at his job, and they went in his single room, broke the door, and found him dead. But in that very small room, there was his huge work, not only the novels, but splendid paintings, extraordinary paintings. And he never showed them to anyone. So he painted and he wrote only for himself. In my opinion, he's one of the greatest artists that ever lived. And many others like in this way. And I tried with my very humble powers to imagine an artist, a total and complete artist like they were.
It's fascinating because, of course, those paintings that Henry Darger did exist. The books existed. Had you never published, your books would still exist. But they wouldn't exist for the reader or the viewer.
Yeah.
And of course it brings into mind that question of what literature is if there is not an audience, and what our relationship is with you.
Yes, we are talking about strange and absolute cases, but actually life is compromise. Life is compromise. You cannot live like that. You cannot write like that. You need the reader, and I need the reader most in my opinion, because all I do is to look for a reader. It's to look for someone in a way, my reader, I imagine my reader like a sort of a pair soul, as the youngsters are looking for their lovers. Because only when you have a reader who is compatible with yourself, the miracle of literature is possible. Mm-hmm. It's like falling in love. Because a book is the product of two persons. Like a child is a product of a man and a woman. Isolated, a book is only a code. It's a dead body. But when it finds a reader, it becomes alive. It becomes a being, a special being, one for each reader, because no one reads the same book with another person. And I will give you an example how important is the reader for a book. For example, a writer starts his book with a simple phrase. It was a beautiful springtime. And the reader, when he gets this message, decodes it. But he cannot, or her cannot, decode what was in the writer's mind, what springtime he meant. But he recomposes that, the meaning of that phrase from his own memory. When he reads "It was a beautiful springtime," he imagines, he remembers a beautiful springtime that he himself or she herself lived. So, in a way, a book is only a code that needs this code to be decoded, understood, fulfilled by the reader. There is no other art where the public, where the audience, to have such a big role, to be the co-writer of a text. In the other arts, you are more or less passive. You can see a movie and drink beer, for example, but not when you read a book. When you read a book, you are absolutely active. All your little light bulbs in your brain just start to flash. And this is the miracle of literature.
We should say that before because I know we're going to run out of time shortly, because I think somebody was giving me a signal that I will open up to questions from the floor very shortly. But we should say that there are so many other aspects to this book. There are actually a lot of secret or occult books in it, coded manuscripts. There are some very surreal moments. There are portals. And there is also a lot of physical description of Bucharest and the particular part that your protagonist lives in, which is sort of outside of the main part of the city. And you're writing about a time, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, about a time of when you were in a prison, when you were living under a dictatorship. And thinking about how that is reflected in your writing, what you wanted to get across about that. And also, I guess I'm thinking, I picked up on you mentioning how important the beats were to you and how important then that idea of America was to you.
Yes, in my opinion, the real cities of this world are the imaginary cities, not the ones that we experience. We can walk in the streets and so on, but the cities that the writers imagined, which sometimes are very different from the real ones. When I read for the first time Ulysses, I imagined that Dublin was a huge metropole because Joyce gonflated this city, which is very nice, but it's not so huge as he created in the Dubliners and in Ulysses. Each and every street, each and every building, just are expanded by his imagination. Yeah, and I was always jealous with the writers that have their own cities, like Joyce owned and still owns Dublin, like Dostoevsky owned St. Petersburg, like Lawrence Durrell owns Alexandria, and so on. Borges, you cannot imagine Buenos Aires, but through the filter of Borges' work. So I was very jealous because of that, and I thought I must have myself my city, a city of my own. And because I'm a lesser writer than this gallery of huge creators, I chose a lesser city, which is Bucharest. Bucharest is very nice and very well. It has its very good moments in the summer when you drink a beer on a terrace in Bucharest and the sky turns rose pink and everything is so peaceful. You are with friends. You feel like in a fraternity with them. Everything is very beautiful in this city, but the traffic is terrible, and the pollution is terrible, and many other things. But in my opinion, and many compatriots that I have agree with it, the true Bucharest is in my works, is in my novels. Here, Bucharest is not that half Western, half Eastern town, which it really is, but it's a sort of a citadel. It's a citadel of imagination. It's a combination of different kinds of architecture. I was many years fascinated with the industrial architecture of the 19th century. You know, it was steel and glass. Those factories, those water castles, those train depots, and so on, they were steel and glass, but also ornated with plaster angels, with Baroque characters, gorgons, plaster atlases, so all kinds of figurines. And I tried to do the same for Bucharest, to create a oniric landscape and an oniric town. Bucharest in my books and in Solenoid, but mostly in Blinding, which is my very best book, is a dream city. Is a dream city. I'm sure all of you dreamed at a certain moment that you find yourself in an unknown city, and you have to get somewhere, and you don't know anything. You don't know the streets. You don't know the buildings. Everything is new and strange and magic for you. So you wander on the streets and meet with some bizarre people, like in Kafka again. So Bucharest, even in Solenoid, in a way, is so strange, so adapted to my way of writing, that it's a completely invented city to the last.
Thank you. And just a final question, just to bring Sean in again. You know, translating something that, as Mircea was saying, is oniric, is dreamlike, has to gesture to all those unworldly possibilities that the reader must be open to. What a job for a translator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can simply agree with you and move on.
Well, and you know what? I was thinking of a book that's recently come out, whose title I've immediately forgotten, but someone will shout it, I know, by Jennifer Croft, which is about the act of translation.
Or Irina Ray, yeah.
Irina Ray.
Yeah.
All the translators of a particular writer get together. I mean, it turns into a bit of a sort of slight murder mystery and madcap kind of farrago, but it is about this idea, isn't it, of numerous different ways to tell stories.
It's closer than you might know. Jenny's a friend of mine, right? She lives in Oklahoma. I live in Texas. We're about about 3 hours apart from each other. And I was talking to her on the phone one time, and I said, I'd just been to Yash, to a writers' conference in which they brought together many of Mircea's translators, and Mircea was there as well, as Ioana was there. And I started to tell her the story about what happened to us. And she started taking notes.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So you are a character in the extinction of Irina Ray. I haven't remembered.
Yeah, I bet somewhere in the nutrients that fed into that novel is the story of all of Mircea's translators coming together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
We lost. I don't know if you want to hear the whole story, but
I
the
do
whole
want
novel.
to hear the whole story.
We were supposed to meet, but Mircea was detained because he had so many people at the previous event asking him for autographs, as often happens when you're a rock star. And so there was we're about I guess 15 of us, not 20, 15 of us, and we decided to go up to the restaurant where we were to meet, but in that hotel, only one elevator went up to the restaurant, so we didn't know that, and half of us got into the good elevator and half into the bad, and so immediately we were lost by half. And then we went up to the restaurant, and it turns out they're having a wedding, so we couldn't be there. And so we went back in the elevator to come down again, but we lost one of the translators, went to the bathroom on that top floor. And then that elevator, for some reason, didn't go down all the way to the bottom. Oh, we thought there was a second restaurant, so we stopped on the 3rd floor. But some other people went down to the lobby. So eventually there's only 3 of us. And then that restaurant was also closed. And so the 3 of us started walking around trying to find our way. We came down a hallway, we opened a door, and it was just brick on the other side. And by this time, we're holding each other's hands because we're terrified, right?
And trying to wake yourself up.
Trying to wake ourselves up. We really felt like we were trapped in one of Mircea's novels, right? We're wandering through the city, and we felt like we were in a dream where we had to get someplace and we couldn't find it there. So eventually, one by one, we all kind of filtered down into the lobby. You know, one of us had their hair standing out like this. One was limping at this point. You know, one was escorted by the police because they tried to kill somebody. Something like that happened. And then we all went down to a bar and eventually met up with Mircea and Ioana and had a beer.
Yeah, you really needed a beer by then, I
Exactly.
imagine. Well, in a conversation that has been so fascinating, could have gone on much longer, but has been full of metaphors. What a wonderful metaphor for meaning, and the hunt for meaning that was. I'd love to invite you in now to ask questions. We've got some roving microphones by our wonderful tabarded volunteers. Thank you so much. Who would like to start the ball rolling? I see a gentleman just at the back there. Thank you so much.
Să fii atent că poate nu aud
Da,
bine,
sigur.
știi?
Thank you very much for being here tonight. Mircea, I would ask you, you keep on referring to Kafka, right? When do you think that we'll be able to study Solenoid in the higher education systems in Romania?
Când o să intre Solenoid în curriculum?
Când o să începem să citim, să învățăm
Okay.
Solenoid la universități la noi în România?
You know, thank you for the question. I'm not a great fan of school manuals. I prefer that the children read me clandestine.
Oh, in secret.
In secret, at home, in their beds, with a lantern.
Oh.
Yes, because everything that gets into the school system is unpleasant for the kids. They find it repulsive because it's
They're being forced
obligatory.
to do it.
It's
Yes,
obligatory, and
yes.
everything that is obligatory is not too much good for the kids. So I think literature should be free. The people should read what they like and what they want. Nobody should tell them syllabuses, curricula, and so on. But a good professor of literature should stir the children's appetite for literature. Should make them understand what they lose if they don't read. Because the youngsters, lost the habit of reading because of the devices and so on. Everybody knows what's this about. But they should be made aware of the huge possibilities that reading good literature give them, because each and every book is a world which waits to be explored, and the children are explorers by definition. They want to read books. They really want, and if they see the parents reading, if they see the teachers enthusiastic about literature, they will become good readers. And I think reading should go on. Reading should go on because nothing is, in my opinion, more beautiful, more fascinating, more appealing to the people than reading books.
Thank you so much. So read in secret, if if you're child. That was the answer. Let's have another question. Yes, there's someone there just at the back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such a wonderful, inspiring conversation. It's a question for Sean. It's what was your journey coming to this novel, and also coming to kind of translating Romanian literature? But also, I'm intrigued that you said that you translate before you read. But Mircea was saying that his life is one big long novel. So how much did you read around, or did you explore back into the fleet of novelistic ships that was there?
Yeah, I'll take the second part first. I felt a certain amount of envy that Mircea was able to live for 60-odd years before writing the book, and I had to get it done on a contract deadline. Right, so I was trying to catch up with all the reading, and I did. I read the things I referenced in the novels. I would search those out. And eventually I amassed this kind of library in my house with the books that I found. The Gadfly, I'd never read The Gadfly before, but there it is. And I eventually was so invested in this process of research that I convinced Will Evans, the publisher at Deep Vellum, to create an auxiliary text, which you can get for free. It's a PDF text that contains snippets from all of the research that I did. But it's called a Solenoid reader. If you want to find out who the ideal reader of Solenoid is, it's this reader here in this text. And we didn't want to give basically an answer key to the book. So we arranged these texts in kind of snippets and certain graphic design so that you can prolong the experience of curiosity that drives you through the book, and that drove me through the translation as well. So you have the sense of discovery as you're reading through these supplementary texts. You can see pictures of Mircea as a school teacher. You can see a map from the time when he was working at the school. You can see a map of that section of Bucharest, all the things that I needed to consult for that. So that was some of the work that I was doing, and that's part of the fun of it, right? That's part of I get to explore a new area of the world, and therefore a new area of Mircea's mind, and add on a new area of my mind to that process.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Person I belatedly realised is a person who's put on lots of literary events in his time. Hello, good to see you. And I think we've got time for one more, and it's just here in the second row. I think we'll just wait for the microphone to come to you, if we may. You don't have them anymore. You shout and I'll shout out to everybody. Go ahead. Do you know what? Here's my magnificent sound man there. Thank you so much.
I very recently saw a picture of yours with Tokarczuk, Olga Tokarczuk and Georgi Gospodinov in France. And we know well. There was a Nobel Prize for Tokarczuk. There was a Booker Prize for Georgi Gospodinov last year, and now this great book, this great award here. So I was wondering whether you would consider that you're part of this Eastern European writers' generation. Is there such thing as Eastern European literature coming to the West or to the world, to the main stage of the world literature? Could you talk about East European world literature in that sense?
Thank you so much.
I also thank you for this very thoughtful question. Of course, I think statistically, there are very good writers everywhere in the world, in Africa, in Asia, in the Western Europe, in the Central Europe, in the Eastern Europe. I don't care too much about this geographic literature. I think I only read simply writers. For me, there are no Russian, Italian, French writers, but I think there are only two kinds: good writers and bad writers. And the difference is that I cannot read the bad writers. From the first phrase of a book, I understand if a writer is very good and I should read his book or not. about Olga and Georgi, well, it happened that we are very good friends, and for a long time. Olga Tokarczuk shared the same scholarship with me in Berlin 25 years ago. It was the DAD program in Berlin, a famous scholarship for 1 year. And so for 1 year, we were very close. We were very young, very poor, because all the people in the East were very poor. We didn't have even laptops by that time. We wrote by hand. And it was a very nice friendship developed between us. And I was so happy when I heard that she won the biggest prize. And Georgi is also a good friend of mine. Our countries are neighbors, Bulgaria and Romania. And I know his literary career for at least 15 years. So the fact that in Saint Malo a week ago we were together is no wonder. But I think there is something in what you said, because I think it's a sort of a boom in the East. If you consider Hungarian writers like Nadash or Krasznahorkai, if you consider Russian writers like Ulitskaya, or Ukrainian writers like Kurkov, if you consider Gospodinov, Olga Tokarczuk, Dubravka Ugresic, who unfortunately is not among us anymore, and many others, there are lots of others, including many younger Romanian writers. The scene in the East is very thriving. It's very agitated, and I have some reason to say that it might happen, with a little luck, it might happen in the Eastern Europe what happened in the 60s and 70s in the Latin America, a sort of a boom, a literary boom. I hope so.
Well, Mircea, we're very delighted you came west this week to be here with us today. And my goodness, with Jenny Erpenbeck and you, what a wonderful week for translated fiction translated into English to whole new readerships. We're so delighted that you came. Thank you very much to the audience. Particular thank you to my 2 junior members in the front row who you've paid very good attention. Thank you very much. And Mircea says you can read his books in secret. However, thank you so much to the Dublin Literary Festival, to the Dublin Literary Award, International Literature Festival Dublin, and thank you to you, Mircea and Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.